Hey everyone, what up, Mad Kaiser here. Now last half of this year, we had Atelier Yumia, which was a brand new mainline entry that was very ambitious, and offered things like a more story-focused direction, doubling down on Rise 3's open world, and even having a brand new combat system that leans towards more action. However, while Yumia was very good, some fans weren't fully on board with Yumia's overall approach, especially when it made some changes. And that is where Gust as well as Team Ninja come in, to unveil Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist and the White Guardian, that just recently came out for PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and PC via Steam. And this one is actually another new mainline game that shares some similarities to its more mobile counterpart of mostly the same name. However, unlike said mobile game, this one is actually a single-player offline console variant and its own separate entity, with this one going back to its more traditional roots, with having turn-based combat, alchemy, and synthesis more so on the focus, as well as the addition of dual protagonists and even legacy characters, without any of the gacha elements. But does this game stand well enough on its own, or is it just carried by fanservice and baggage from its more mobile counterpart? Well, that's what I'm here to find out. Special thanks to Koei Tecmo Europe for once again providing me a review code for PlayStation 5. And before we begin, if you like what you've seen here, then by all means, like the video, click that subscribe button if you're new, and hit that notification icon if you want more Atelier content from yours truly. With that said, let's gather more items, solve a mystery concerning our main two heroes, and meet familiar faces as we head straight into Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist, and the White Guardian. So our story follows our main two heroes, with Rias being a cute cat girl, and Slade, who's the next male protagonist since, holy crap, 12 years ago, Jesus! With Rias, she serves more as a cheerful adventurer, with a friendly personality, and wants to restore her hometown of Highfine after it suffered a mysterious disaster, and hoping to reopen the shop left by her own grandpa and investigate the cause of that said disaster. And as for Slade's case, he's more of a calm and reliable man, who also returns to his home to uncover the meaning of his father's last wishes, and possesses a mysterious tool called a Geist Core, which can open the entrances to dimensional paths that can lead to alternate dimensions. After a fateful encounter, Rias discovers her new talents and becomes an alchemist, and together they set forth to find more about the mystery, as well as restore Halfheim, and along the way they'll meet familiar faces through different worlds, as well as come across different paths and the hope of finding out what really caused that disaster to begin with. And that's the story, and overall it was very enjoyable. And while I wouldn't say it's as deep as say Yumia's, it was still a nice ride to get through, with mostly having an intriguing mystery surrounding of what happened to Halfheim all those years ago, as well as the occurrence of these dimensional paths, and how Rias and Slade are supposedly connected to ancient alchemists of old. While the first few hours do take a while to get going, as it's more so to serve to introduce the characters and build the world, once you go deeper in the later chapters, it pays off big time, with some really shocking and interesting turns here and there. Though what really helps is, well, obviously with Atelier, is managing to balance its whole tone, with having some serious moments alongside some genuine heartfelt and touching moments. Also helped that the characters are really good. Rias is a really enjoyable character, being both very energetic, upbeat, and determined to help out whenever she can, even if that sometimes can lead her to trouble at times. Also, she's a cat girl, so already she's an S-tier character in my book.
I like you a lot.
She's pretty much a big kid in the best way possible, and also has feelings for Slade, which perfectly segues to him as well, as he's more calm, respectful, and plays off well to Rias, serving more as a double act, with his own goals to find out on what his dad left, and even has some funny moments in of himself. And they both share some really good chemistry together. The other side characters like Camilla, Heiter, and Randolph are also pretty good in their own right. And as for the rest of the cast, it's comprised of other Atelier characters, like Reyes from the Minor Chemia duology, Wilbo from the Dusk trilogy, Toturi from the Island series, and Sophie from the Mysterious series, and they all play off well from each other, with their own personalities supporting our main two heroes, with some very nice playful banter and touching moments. And even if I currently haven't played a lot of their games of origin, well, I did dabble with Sophie's a little bit.
It's a barrel!
I still got a nice feel from these characters, with Wilbo probably being my favorite here. In fact, a lot of prior Atelier characters make an appearance, especially the Queen of Fires herself, Ryza.
Yes! Yes!
As well as the mobile counterpart protagonist herself, Resna, and even the polar alchemists themselves, which is pretty cool. All of them are really performed very well here. And while yes, just like with the recent Atelier games, this one sadly has no English dub, which kinda sucks, but still, the Japanese voice acting in this is still in top form. Though another oddity I do have is how they do mention events of said mobile game, and given the fact that that game has ended its service, especially here in the West recently, it made it a little bit confusing at times. But even then, it didn't hinder my overall experience, as for the most part, this game was still enjoyable on its own. Now we get on to the visuals, and man does this game look really beautiful and colorful. Now, the mobile game itself, regardless on how you feel about it, was still a nice looking game, with its overall characters and models, and that same thankfully carries here to the console version. And fun fact, where the current Atelier games would use Koei Tecmo's in-house Katana engine, Resleriana, the Red Alchemist and the White Guardian actually uses the Unity engine, much like on how Fire Emblem Engage uses it. And well, just like that game, it's also very beautiful, with having a very strong art direction. The characters, especially our main two leads here, pop off very well. I mean, hey, once again, Rias is a cat girl, so S+ character design already.
Yeah, boy.
And even Slade here looks very dapper, and the same can be said for both the side characters as well as the legacy characters, with especially the reps from both the Salzburg trilogy as well as the Minor Chemia games having a very strong glow up. The environments, especially during nighttime and daytime, look really amazing, and so do the dimensional paths. Now, obviously, this game does take assets from the mobile game, and you can definitely tell that this is still a smaller scale project than say Yumia, as you do get a solid amount of these wonderful, but still images. But even still, it's not a deterrent for this game. The only gripe I do have is that I'm not too fond of the UI, especially during battle, as it's a bit simplistic and plain for my liking, but again that is still carried from the mobile games, so that is still a nitpick. Now as for performance, it runs mostly smooth on PlayStation 5, but the only drawback I did notice is that you did have a few texture pop-ins, and some characters do have their outfits clipping together, and it's more noticeable here than in other JRPGs even. As well as some weird field to battle transitions, especially when you're not hitting enemies. And there were some oddities, especially during the performance, especially when you go to combat. But we'll get there soon enough. But for the most part, this game runs smooth. Then we move on to the combat. Now Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist and the White Guardian returns with the traditional Atelier turn-based combat, and even iterates upon its mobile counterpart, and even Sophie too, with having a team of 6 playable characters, with 3 in the front row and 3 in the back row, and you can switch in between, among also having things like a timeline of showing both you and your enemy's turn, as well as random effects like HP and AP boost, or even defense down, similar to the Trails series. You also have things like your standard attack, skills like passive and aggressive that will cost AP, and TP that's used for multi action, where up to 3 characters you can choose to stack skills or items to create powerful combos, as well as interrupt the enemy's turn. There's also the Unite system, starting off with the gauge here, which will activate passive effects called Unite attacks, And when that gauge is fully charged, it will allow players to unleash powerful attacks during the Unite burst, which will do a lot of damage.
Now that's a lot of damage!
And during your enemy's turn, when an enemy attacks you, you'll be able to
Parry it! Parry it! Parry it!
And if you time it right, you can reduce the damage, gain TP, as well as nullify the effects. Just like Expedition 30... You get back. Good. Jokes aside though, it's similar to the position guards that even Rise of 3 and Yumia had. Oh, and I guess even Fairy Tail 2, since that was also made by Gust. Enemies will have also certain weaknesses and a stun gauge, and taking that down will make them completely vulnerable. Upon that, being able to spend skill points in your skill tree to gain new buffs, moves, and enhancements. Though sadly, however, the skill points is shared, so choose wisely to spend when balancing all 6 characters. And overall, the combat itself is very engaging. Now, initially, while it does feel a bit simple and easy, especially during the first few encounters, later parts do ramp up in difficulty, and allows for more strategic gameplay. Well, apart from one boss that feels like a massive like. However, outside of that, the other part that does hinder the experience a little bit during gameplay would have to be the performance. Now initially when I played this when I got the code, it started lagging during the later parts, where bosses would lag when trying to attack your characters. However, that was patched. But sadly, another performance issue is while the frame rate does like to tank during the later parts of the game, and not gonna lie, it does feel a little bit jarring, especially when you're playing this on the PlayStation 5. Hopefully that does get patched later on, but even still, that is worth something to note. Now, it wouldn't be an Atelier game without its alchemy, and just like past games, you can gather various items and materials, and then mix them in your cauldron, with each material having a gift color. And if you can align the colors together, you'll get a much better result, on top of also glowing that allows you to perform a recipe morph, which can perform a much new and even better item. On top of that, you also have a recipe tree to find more items and enhancements. And speaking of, you also have the Geist cores to enhance whatever item you have to become even more stronger at the expense of coal and traits, which overall makes the synthesis in this a more robust and in-depth experience, which is something that I think a lot of people really enjoy, as this provides a high skill ceiling to create some really powerful equipment and items, which you can use to either sell, use in battle, or complete quests, which I imagine is also a nice change of pace, which after Yumia debatably streamed alchemy in that game to be a little bit too thin, even to the point where you can just break the game really. But suffice to say that this game puts alchemy back on the forefront. When it comes to exploration, instead of the whole open zone approach that both Rise of 3 and Yumia went through, Resleriana goes for a more sublinear experience, with some solid alternate pathways to find items, treasure, enemies, and even fast travel points. But it also keeps things exciting, with the addition of the wide jump, being able to zip through higher places, or Geist Break, being able to smash through opposing walls to find more secrets. However, there are also the dimensional paths, which are surrounded with rarer items, enemies, and fairies, with the maps being completely invisible until you clear the rooms yourself. And, depending on the condition, you'll be randomly transported to ones, which will have things like a field boss to beat, or even find golden ponies, or even find a key to unlock a vault. And the fairies that you do find can be recruited to provide some very unique effects. It overall makes for a very interesting experience. Though two gripes I do have is when you do get items, sometimes hitting them against a nearby enemy causes you to fight. And the other is that while a lot of the levels are decently nice to explore, especially ones that you see in the mobile game and not limited to just screens, there are some that feel a little bit too congested, almost like a maze. But really, that's still a minor nitpick. Now we get on to the music, and well, it's Atelier. More often than not, they have some really great soundtracks, and I'm happy to report that Resleriana's is also really good, with some very soothing and relaxing tracks, especially from the town themes to your Atelier one, mixed in with some very emotional beats, as well as a very catchy battle theme. So, as always, here's a quick sample. Now we get on to the content. Now, Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist and the White Guardian is quite packed. First obviously are the town quests, which are basically the general side quests where you do things like kill certain monsters, gain items, and kill bosses, but also the various episode quests, which are basically side stories, where you get the chance to interact with other characters, whether it's other side characters or even your party members. And you get to see what they are doing, and you get to learn more about them, and even having some really funny interactions that made me laugh. But there are also the character requests, where you get to interact with various Atelier characters, including ones from Alchemist, the Rise series, the Grenade games, and even the Salzburg games. But the major one that plays a huge factor to the game's overall gameplay loop would have to be the town building, where you can sell various items at your shop to get more money, which will help increase resources into a store and have fun. And that alone paves the way to open new shops and environments, and it's also essential for the story to progress. It's one, depending on how you feel about it, might be or not to your cup of tea, but I think it's relatively charming most of the time. Among that, there's of course a new game plus, as well as an extra hard mode. As well, you get to also play as the other protagonist, which will also pack some extra cutscenes, and there is said to be new DLC, especially including new playable characters in the mix. So, with that, how is this game? Especially comparing it to Atelier Yumia beforehand. Well, if you are a fan of the series and weren't too on board with Yumia's overall approach, then I think this game ticks all the boxes, and in a way, it's a nice palate cleanser. And clocking in around 30 hours if you do one playthrough, or even double if you do the second, makes for a really jam-packed experience, with this one returning to its more traditional roots, while still being unique of what it does to add to the new table, and shows that both a traditional Atelier game like this, and a newer one like Yumia can still coexist, much like on how we got the Rise series, which helped push the series new forward with its new twist on the overall structure, but we still had games like Sophie 2 and the Marie remake, which still shows that the core identity of classic Atelier is still not lost. Just like, for example, Sega and RGG Studio with the Yakuza Like a Dragon series, where the new mainline titles will go for turn-based combat, but other spin-offs and remakes will still have the traditional brawler combat that veterans love in the old games. And really, that's just the best of both worlds we got here. And it's really impressive on how they can even take the good aspects of a mobile game and make it into a more full-fledged console game with none of the drawbacks, much like on how the upcoming Octopath Traveler 0 is, and it's something that I think other companies should take notes of. The story is pretty fun, the characters are also great, as well as the visuals, the combat, and the general mechanics. And while there are a few nitpicks here and there, this game, in essence, is a love letter to classic Atelier, and definitely for the fans. Overall, I'll give Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist, and the White Guardian 4 fairies out of 5. Anyway guys, thank you guys so much for watching, hope you enjoyed this, and let me know down in the comments if you guys played this game, do you guys prefer it over Yumia, and are you guys also excited for the upcoming Atelier Ryza DX trilogy that's coming literally this November. So until then, special thanks to my patrons, and Mad Kaiser, out!